just want to show a few of the tools that I like to use when I design something like a weapon and bullet impacts. I'm using Ableton Live. However, this could work in Pro Tools. Pro Tools wasn't really behaving nice with my screen capture software, and I actually needed an arpeggiator to show some of this stuff. So in Live is where I like to do actually a lot of design as well. First thing I'll show is S-Layer. It's from a company called Twisted Tools, and I started using this when I got tired of layering stuff in Pro Tools and offsetting and trying to adjust the pitches of things and the panning of things manually. It just got really tedious, and this is a very cool little tool. It's a drum hit designer, I think it's what it was designed for, but I use it for just layering sounds in different ways. I like to use these for explosions and bullet impacts, and I use it for HUD stuff, UI sounds. It'll also loop, has some loop functionality or one-shot functionality. So to start, I'll show some of the kernel corn, the bullet impacts. So I wanted them to sound like a bullet impact. So there's your traditional impacts across different surfaces. I wanted it to have a popcorn-like feel. There is like, on the visual effects, there's a little bit of kernel debris. Fireworks are always fun, and like firecrackers have kind of a popcorny feel. So I just took some of the theme of what this particular corn kernel weapon, and just, in SoundMiner or recording some different sources, just the separate elements that I would use in a traditional DAW to layer and make it. Instead of layering it there, I just export it. So I do a lot of little bits of editing. Here's some little fireworks I think might be an interesting layer, and then all the bullet impacts. Export it all out and then bring it all in as a sample map in S-Layer, and then make a sample map so that it holds 128 samples. You can drag and drop them onto this, or you can create a sample map and then drag the sample map just onto here. Once it's in there, these samples from 0 to 127 will load the sample. You can offset the start time. If you have longer files, you can kind of read into it if you wanted to do that here. I don't use that. What I do use instead is the delay. So that's where you can offset the timing of it, and sort of, instead of stacking everything on the same frame, you start to cascade the sound. Pitching up and down, it's very easy in here. In Pro Tools, you have to like either audio suite or you have to have a separate sampler to start randomizing some pitch. This is very easy. You can hit random on the pitch. Panning, if you want to have a different panning on these different layers, randomize the pan. Randomize the volume. This is mostly what I use. You can also reverse the samples. It's really just fun to experiment with some of your core sounds and ideas. Toss it in here, hit the random button. So I'll show you some of this corn, the impacts. And I'm using a keyboard here, so I need to set the input. So I'm saving some presets of some of the interesting ones. Thought that one was interesting. That one could work. I think it maybe needs a transient just at the front. So I mean, oftentimes this isn't the final version. This is an interesting element. I just want some interesting layered stuff, and then maybe in a DAW I'll do some final EQ and mastering and final layering. So for these particular impacts, I think they need to have the different surface types. So I might put a front end on it that's a concrete kind of hit, or a dirt one, or see how I can start separating some of the interesting hits with the different surfaces. So these are the presets, which I've become in the habit of doing, where I didn't before. I was very ad hoc in my approach, and I would just hit the random button, which I'll do here in a moment. So the idea is just, I've got my samples in here, and I want to layer them, and I don't want to do it all manually. I want to surprise myself with a happy accident of a certain combination that I'll hear for the first time, and I'll know right away if it's interesting to me or not. The problem in Pro Tools is like that space bar, hit space bar, adjust, nudge, nudge, space bar, volume, automate. I've forgotten if this is interesting now. I'm too nitpicky on stuff. So with this one, just hit random. Any of these buttons says, hey, if I hit this master random, randomize all of this stuff that's lit up. And it has some effects. It has some kind of granular effects, which I don't want right now. You can randomize the envelope of the entire thing. There's some sends that you can randomly send to this nanoverb and the delay, which I'm also not using, but it's also really cool. So here's a random one. It's interesting. I like the little ricochet. I like that one. It's got a little cartoon smack and some crunches. And the other cool thing is maybe you've got a good one that's got some character. Maybe this one, I just want to keep the same set and have them cascade differently. So it's the exact same content in a different order. And that's some cool variation just in the offset of the exact same content, or just the pitch. Or the volume. Or all of it. I just like to randomize a whole bunch of stuff, and then I've started to append, I'll just save the presets. That way, if I bounce this stuff down, which is what I'll do, I'll just hit record and, jam away, record some performance, and then go back and edit out the interesting bits. I've gotten into some habit of saving a preset. So if I needed to, I could actually pull the entire thing apart if I wanted to go back to this one and be like, there's one layer in there I don't like, so you can actually kind of see what all the layers are if you want that control. So that's something I like to use a lot, and it's a really cool tool just to screw around with. Actually, I might show it for some other things. Its looping functionality is cool, so maybe I'll show some of that. And using it for UI is actually quite fun. Maybe I'll show some of that. So that's kind of part one. Part two is a similar style, and it's actually the same Twisted Tools Reactor Ensemble, and the other one is actually a Reactor Ensemble as well, which I probably should have mentioned, although you see Reactor there. This one is, it's the same idea, except where S layer was one stack of 8 samplers, this one is 8 cells, and each cell has 4 layers. This is also a drum kit designer, and it works really cool for that purpose, but you know, I like to spin music tools into sound design for some reason. Not sure why. I modified this one a little bit because all these banks would say kick, snare, hi-hat, and then they would have like, you know, user bank. I just wanted it to be what I wanted it to. And I was kind of learning some Reactor stuff along the way because it's not very straightforward the way some of this stuff is done. And I wanted to set the ranges that the original version of this is they have different subtypes. So this way it's a little more clear. I've modified a few things. I've added some additional random stuff, I think mostly on the EQ stuff, yeah. So you can randomize the effect, but I won't get into that a whole lot. I just wanted to show basically this same randomly stacked idea that I use for weapons. For this one, what I did was I designed a whole bunch of folders. I kind of broke up all of these types of sounds, which are very common in garden warfare, and into different elements. A lot of our weapons will have these elemental variations, and it's going to be fire, and it's going to be ice, or it's going to be like magical, or it'll be toxic, or it'll be metal. So I just started to just comb through the libraries and things and design a bunch of hits. And if I was on a synth and I had some sci-fi stuff, I would just record a whole bunch of stuff. I throw it in my sci-fi folder, servo stuff, tech stuff. There's a lot of robots, or not a lot, but there are quite a few robotic-like characters. So I've got some techie, servo, robotic, punch, some organic, goopy things, and leaves, and wood, and hits, and traditional gun stuff, glitch stuff, fireworks, explosions. And then I can just load these folders up. Each folder, I've made a sample map, a Reactor sample map. And I just throw them in to these different banks. And it's nice that this is the cartoon bank. Fireworks. This is the vegetable one. So I've got 8 sample maps that I get to work with in this ensemble. So I'll and then I just randomly want to play them all. The Colonel Corn, he's got these 2 cobs of corn. I wanted it to feel cool. It's a pretty fast rate of fire. Some of the stuff, as I showed, is slave to that exact rate of fire. And a lot of the stuff I like to just loop and make something interesting that's just cool sounding as a loop. That's where I use this Arpeggiator, and I'll just show one of the presets. So that's just one of the presets. This isn't actually the content that I showed that's in the game. I could show you the loop, but I didn't save actually the preset because I'll usually make way more loops than I need because I want to have different types of frequencies stacked with other frequencies. So I'll end up with a lot of different mono loops and a lot of different stereo loops, and I'll actually bring them all into Frosted, and I'll load them all in as a persistent variation and start just changing the value on 2 or 3 samplers to start auditioning different layers together. Sometimes those layers will be slave to the tempo. Sometimes they'll just be a free running loop. And I'll just start experimenting, which is actually another fun step. But this is also a really fun step in this one. So this, I have a keyboard and I'm just hitting a key down, and the arpeggiator is just refiring. So it roughly matches the rate of fire of his weapon, and a lot of times I know, like, I'll play it, I'll feel it, and I'll get a sense of what I would expect it to hear. I'll pay attention to the ammo value as it drops, because sometimes you can't fake it a lot. You have to have something that's slave to that, so it feels like you kind of get a sense of your ammo and that rate of fire. This preset has all 8 layers going. If you solo each one, you get a sense of what it's doing. Like this one, maybe doesn't need the... It's pretty complex. It doesn't need to be. You could do this with one cell. That could be an interesting layer on its own, which is why I got in the habit of creating presets. So I could pull it apart, and this could become the entire weapon in a sound patch. But how you get there is really fun, because I just hit random. So I've got the same random idea as an S layer, and I randomize the samples and the pitch and the delay times sometimes. Although when I'm actually arpeggiating stuff like this, it doesn't need a cascading effect. So that one's a little too big, but it's just fun to come across something that you think is going to work. And then it'll always play like a tail, because it's just rapid firing, and then it'll play as an exit, it'll play the tail of all these samples stacked together. Sometimes those are really interesting, and I'll actually leave it on, and I'll have the loop end, and it'll play it out, which is what I did on some of the imp stuff, which I'll show as well. This is another... That was interesting. It's like, cartoony and poppy, and some traditional gun and some kind of mechanism. And there's maybe a little bit of a... kind of like it without that. So that would be a cool layer. That might not be appropriate for Kernel Corn, but I think that sounds cool too. Changing the rate is as simple as just changing the rate of the arpeggiator. How fast is your weapon? And it really starts to get sci-fi. But that might be cool. That's kind of a cool mechanism. So maybe that's just a layer. You want this kind of a mechanical layer. And some of the random panning gets getting faster gets, maybe it's one of those kind of awkward intermittent rate of fire, which always were kind of difficult to do. It's like it's not quick enough to feel cool because it's quick, and it's not enough time to make it interesting over time because it's just another shot that happens. I mean, there's a lot of PVZ-ness happening inside of that one. But narrowing some of this panning sometimes helps. So that's that. That's Polyplex. It's super fun. And similar to Polyplex is this Max for Live variation, which I modified to just direct a folder. Instead of requiring a sample map that's only 128 samples, I can direct this to a folder of thousands, or doesn't matter. Doesn't matter the number of samples. I think by default, this was a drag and drop. You have to drag one sample for each slot layer. I just wanted way more randomness than that, so I made these little folder lookups. You could actually then pick it from here if you wanted to this way, but again, I like setting up happy accidents. So I think this one has a cartoon layer, a fireworks layer, a gun layer, a vegetable layer, a punch layer, a swish layer, and 2 organic layers. Offset the timing, offset the playback, speed. The cool thing about this particular plugin or Max for Live device is the envelopes. You can start to have pitch envelopes or like speed envelopes. And that's kind of good for one shots, because sometimes if your envelope is too short or it's too slow, the retriggering of the arpeggiator kind of behaves a bit weird. But I like the movement that this one has. So it's got the different shapes of the envelopes can really make it interesting over time. It's just random. Not sure when I'd use that, but it could be an interesting explosion layer. So, and it's still going. So maybe it needs like a more traditional explosion, but then and then this could happen. And a fancy magical water weapon, you know. I don't know. So there's 3 of them. I'm not sure. I've never seen this used. It's maybe a very common practice. But I do watch a lot of like SoundWorks and a lot of sound design features on films. This one is really fun for creating anything layered, actually. Yeah, hope people find it useful. Let me know if you think this is new, or yeah, if it's useful. If you design something really cool with it, I'd love to know. It's a huge arsenal for me, and I'll show some of the imp stuff. So the more sci-fi flavor, similar or same tools, just kind of showing some other use cases.